She took our money. We have the texts. She knows exactly what she did. That was my brother Brent, under oath in a Greenville County courtroom. His voice sharp, certain, rehearsed. He said it while looking directly at the judge, not at me. He never once looked at me. I sat at the defendant's table with my hands folded in my lap. I didn't flinch. I didn't shake my head. I didn't whisper to my attorney. I just listened. Because 3 rows behind me, a man named Douglas Reed sat quietly with a flash drive in his jacket pocket that the opposing counsel had never asked to examine. On that drive were 11 years of complete bank records for every dollar that had ever entered or left Sutton grounds. Every deposit, every transfer, every payment. 11 years, documented to the penny. There was no $175,000 on that drive. There never had been. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you've ever had someone in your own family look you in the eye and lie about what you gave them, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me take you back. I started Sutton Grounds when I was 29 years old. I had a pickup truck, a used trailer, a business license I filed myself at the Greenville County Clerk's office, and a daughter named Harper who was just turning 2. I'd divorced her father, Marcus Webb, that same year. The split was civil. No alimony, no custody fight. Marcus moved to Charlotte. He lives there now. The agreement was clean and final, and I preferred it that way. I took nothing from the marriage except my daughter and a very clear understanding that I would build whatever came next with my own 2 hands. And I did. By year 3, Sutton Grounds had 2 employees and steady residential contracts. By year 5, I'd added a second truck and moved into light commercial work. By year 10, the year this story takes place, annual revenue was $390,000. 4 employees, a client list I'd built one handshake at a time. No investors, no silent partners, no family money. That last part is important. Remember it, because while I was building all of that, I was also paying for things no one in my family ever mentioned. It started 7 years ago when I was 32. My father, Earl's employer, reduced his health coverage. He was 60 at the time. My mother, Connie, was 57, and the gap in their insurance was real. Earl mentioned it once at a Sunday dinner. He didn't ask me directly. He mentioned it the way he always mentioned things, with his eyes on his plate and a silence afterward that was designed to be filled by someone else. I filled it. I called their insurance provider the following Monday and began paying the monthly premium, $1,100 a month. I set it up as an automatic withdrawal from my business account, and I never discussed it again. Neither did they, not once, not a thank you, not a card at Christmas, not an acknowledgement at the dinner table. The payments simply continued, month after month, like gravity. $1,100 in January, $1,100 in February, $1,100 every single month for 7 years. That's 84 payments, $92,400. I never missed one. Then came Brent's car. 4 years before the hearing, when I was 35, my younger brother lost his vehicle to repossession. Brent was 31 at the time, working in regional commercial real estate as a leasing agent. His income was inconsistent. His spending was not. The car was gone, and without it, he couldn't get to client properties, which meant he couldn't close deals, which meant he couldn't pay rent, which meant the whole structure was about to come down. He called me on a Tuesday. I remember because Harper had a school project due and I was helping her glue dried leaves onto poster board at the kitchen table. Brent didn't ask for help the way most people ask for help. He told me the situation and then went quiet, the same silence our father used. The silence that waits. I started covering the lease on a replacement vehicle the following week. $800 a month for 4 years, 48 payments, $38,400. He never said thank you for that either. So the total, if you're keeping count, and I always kept count, even when I pretended I didn't, was $130,800. That's $92,400 in health insurance premiums for my parents and $38,400 in car lease payments for my brother. Over 7 years. Exposed to no one. Acknowledged by no one. Documented by me in a spreadsheet I updated on the 1st of every month because that's who I am. I document things. The family dinners continued through all of it. Every other Sunday at Earl and Connie's house in Greenville, Connie would make pot roast or baked chicken. Earl would sit at the head of the table. Brent would show up with Shayla, his wife, and they'd talk about the deals he was closing or almost closing or planning to close. Shayla would smile at me across the table with a warmth that always felt like it had been rehearsed in the car on the way over. Connie would refill glasses. Earl would say very little. And not once in 7 years of those dinners did anyone say, "Willa, thank you for the $1,100. Willa, thank you for the $800. Willa, we know what you're doing, and it matters." I told myself it was just how family worked. I told myself the silence was a form of love, that mentioning the money would make it transactional, and family wasn't supposed to be transactional. I pushed it down. I swallowed it. I built my business, raised my daughter, and kept writing the checks. But something shifted about 8 months before the hearing. It happened at one of those Sunday dinners. Brent leaned back in his chair, swirling iced tea in a glass Connie had just filled for the 3rd time, and he asked me a question. He asked it casually, the way you'd ask someone about the weather. He said, "So, Willa, when you started Sutton Grounds, what was your startup capital? Did you bring in outside investors, or was it all self-funded?" The table didn't react. Connie kept cutting pie. Earl stared at his plate. Shayla sipped her water and watched me over the rim of the glass. But the question wasn't casual. I'd been running a business for 10 years. Brent had never once asked me about startup capital. He'd never asked about investors. He'd never shown any curiosity about how Sutton Grounds operated, how it was funded, or where the money came from. In 10 years, the most he'd ever said about my company was that landscaping seemed like a nice little niche. I answered vaguely. I said it was self-funded, kept the details short, and changed the subject to Harper's school project. Nobody pressed. Dinner continued. But that night, after Harper was asleep, I sat alone in my home office. The house was dark, except for the laptop screen and the street light cutting through the blinds. I opened my email and found a text Brent had sent earlier that week, one I'd skimmed and forgotten. He'd asked whether Sutton Grounds had ever taken on business debt or external financing. Another question that had no reason to exist unless someone was building something. I sat there for a long time. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. I didn't call anyone. I didn't confront Brent. I didn't tell my parents. I typed the name Douglas Reed into a search bar. He was a forensic accountant based in Greenville, 52 years old, experienced in small business financial audits. I called his office the next morning and retained him before lunch. 3 months later, Douglas had compiled a complete record of every inbound and outbound transaction for Sutton Grounds going back 11 years, to the year before I even founded the company. Every deposit, every wire, every check, every transfer. 11 years of documentation sitting on a flash drive no bigger than my thumb. There was no $175,000 anywhere in those records. There was no transfer of any amount from Brent Sutton. No transfer from Shayla Sutton. Not $175,000. Not $75,000. Not $500. Nothing. The only money that had ever moved between me and my brother moved in one direction, from me to him. $38,400 in lease payments. The arrow pointed one way. It always had. I didn't know yet exactly what Brent was building, but I knew he was building something. 6 weeks before the hearing, I found out what it was. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Brent and Shayla Sutton versus Willa Sutton, filed in Greenville County Civil Court. The complaint alleged that in the early years of Sutton Grounds, Brent and Shayla had provided me with a verbal business loan of $175,000 to help capitalize the firm. The complaint stated that I had acknowledged the loan in text messages and had repeatedly promised repayment. The complaint demanded the full $175,000 plus interest. The supporting evidence was a series of text message screenshots. I looked at them carefully. They showed a conversation, supposedly between me and Brent, in which I thanked him for the money, acknowledged the $175,000 figure, and discussed a repayment timeline. The messages looked real. The phone numbers were correct. The tone was close enough to how I write that someone who didn't know me well might believe it. But I didn't write those messages. I never received $175,000. The conversation never happened. I stayed quiet. I called James Parker, my attorney. I forwarded him the screenshots in Douglas Reed's flash drive. I did not call Brent. I did not call my parents. I didn't respond to the lawsuit with anger or panic. I responded with documentation. Then, the same week the lawsuit was filed, 2 other things happened. My father, Earl, filed a lien against Sutton Grounds business accounts. Not through a lawyer, not through proper legal channels. Earl walked into the county clerk's office and filed it himself, claiming Sutton Grounds owed a debt associated with the lawsuit. The lien was designed to freeze my operating capital, to choke the business, to pressure me into settling before any judge ever saw the evidence. Earl didn't consult an attorney. He'd spent 12 years on the Greenville HOA board, and somewhere in those 12 years, he'd convinced himself that authority meant knowing how things worked. He didn't know how this worked. And then there was Connie. My mother picked up her phone, dialed the main number for Harper's school, asked to speak with the principal, identified herself as Harper Sutton's grandmother, and told him that I was, her words, mentally unstable and a danger to my child. The principal's name doesn't matter. What matters is what happened next. He was required to document the call. He was required to act on it. And what acting on it meant was pulling my 11-year-old daughter out of her 6th grade classroom in the middle of the school day and sending her to the guidance counselor's office for a welfare check. Harper sat in that office for 40 minutes. She didn't know why she was there. No one told her. She sat in a chair that was too big for her, with her sketchbook on her lap, and she waited. When I picked her up that afternoon, she climbed into the back seat and buckled her seatbelt without saying anything. I pulled out of the school parking lot and turned onto the main road. The car was quiet for 2 blocks. Then Harper said, in a voice that was very small and very careful, "Did someone tell the school something bad about you, Mom?" I kept my eyes on the road. I said yes. I said it wasn't true. There was another silence, longer this time. Then Harper said, "Is it because of Grandma?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Harper nodded once and looked out the window. I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. The car was silent. Harper sat in the back seat with her hands in her lap, looking at nothing. I sat in the front seat with my hands on the steering wheel, and something inside me shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, quiet break. My daughter was 11 years old. She had been pulled out of class because my mother called her school and lied. Not in a moment of confusion, not in a burst of emotion. Connie made that call as a tactic. She made it to pressure me. She made it knowing it would reach Harper, and she made it anyway. I sat in that car for a long time after Harper went inside. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was clear. I was done pretending this was okay. If you've ever had a family member try to use your child against you, hit that like button and subscribe. I went inside. I made Harper a grilled cheese sandwich and sat with her at the kitchen table while she ate. She didn't mention the school again. She opened her sketchbook and drew while I washed the dishes. The house was quiet. After she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee that went cold hours ago. I opened my email and wrote one message. It was to James Parker. It was 4 sentences long. I told him I was ready to proceed. I told him to retain a digital forensics specialist to examine the text message screenshots. I told him Douglas Reed's audit was complete and available, and I told him that whatever the court decided, I would not be settling. I read it twice. I pressed send. The next 6 weeks were silent. I didn't call Brent. I didn't call my parents. I went to work. I picked Harper up from school. I cooked dinner. I reviewed Douglas Reed's reports at night after Harper was asleep. James Parker retained Margaret Collins, a digital forensics specialist, age 44, who examined the screenshots Brent and Shayla had submitted as evidence. Her analysis confirmed what I already knew. The messages were generated using a consumer message editing application. The embedded metadata showed file creation timestamps that post-dated the alleged conversations by 14 months. The texts Shayla had manufactured as proof were created more than a year after they were supposed to have been sent. I told no one. I prepared. I waited. And on the morning of the hearing, I put on a gray blazer, dropped Harper at school, and drove to the Greenville County Courthouse with a folder on the passenger seat that contained 11 years of the truth. I parked in the courthouse lot at exactly 8:12 a.m. The morning was overcast. I sat in the car for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, the engine off, the folder on the seat beside me. I didn't rehearse anything. I didn't take a deep breath to steady myself. I was already steady. I had been steady for 6 weeks since the night I sat in the driveway after picking Harper up from school and felt that clean, quiet brake settle into place like a bolt sliding home. I picked up the folder, locked the car, and walked into the building. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, 2 tables facing the bench. Brent and Shayla were already seated at the plaintiff's table with their attorney. Brent wore a navy suit I'd never seen before. His posture was rigid, rehearsed, like he'd practiced sitting in that chair. Shayla sat beside him in a cream blouse with her hands folded on the table. She looked composed. She looked ready. She had no idea what was on Douglas Reed's flash drive. I sat down at the defendant's table next to James Parker. I set the folder in front of me and placed my hands flat on the surface. Behind me, 3 rows back, Douglas Reed took his seat. He didn't nod at me. He didn't need to. We both knew what he was carrying. The hearing opened. Brent's attorney made his case first. He described a verbal loan of $175,000, given in good faith by Brent and Shayla Sutton to capitalize Sutton Grounds in its early years. He described a sister who accepted the money gratefully, acknowledged it in writing, and then refused to repay it as the business grew. He described betrayal. He described ingratitude. He submitted the text message screenshots into evidence, printed, enlarged, mounted on presentation boards. Then Brent took the stand. He was confident. His voice didn't waver. He described the loan as though he remembered the exact moment he wrote the check, except there was no check. He described conversations about repayment terms, except there were no terms. He described trust violated by me. He described family generosity from him, and then he said it, the line he'd been building to all morning. She took our money. We have the text. She knows exactly what she did. He said it looking at Judge Howard, not at me. He never looked at me once. I sat with my hands in my lap. I didn't react. There was nothing to react to. I already knew what was coming. James Parker stood up. He thanked the court. He called Douglas Reed to the stand. Douglas walked to the front of the courtroom carrying a laptop and the flash drive. He was calm, unhurried, the way people are calm when they've done their work, and they know it holds. He introduced himself. CPA forensic accountant. 23 years of experience in financial audits for small and mid-sized businesses, retained by me 3 months before the hearing to conduct a complete review of Sutton Grounds' financial records. James Parker asked him what he found. Douglas opened the laptop. The flash drive was already inserted. He pulled up the master file, a comprehensive audit of every inbound and outbound transaction for Sutton Grounds over 11 years, every deposit, every wire transfer, every check, every electronic payment. 11 years of records, organized chronologically, cross-referenced with source bank statements. James Parker asked, Mr. Reed, in your review of these records, did you identify any transfer of $175,000 from Brent Sutton or Shayla Sutton to Sutton Grounds or to Willa Sutton personally? Douglas said, no. Did you identify any transfer of any amount at any time? From Brent Sutton or Shayla Sutton to the defendant or her business? No, there is no record of any financial transfer from either plaintiff to the defendant or her company. Not $175,000. Not any amount. In 11 years of records, the only transactions between Ms. Sutton and her brother were outbound, payments made by Ms. Sutton on behalf of Brent Sutton. Specifically, $800 monthly for a vehicle lease over 48 months, totaling $38,400. The courtroom was quiet. James Parker asked, and did your audit identify any other recurring payments made by the defendant to family members? Douglas said, yes, monthly health insurance premium payments of $1,100 to cover Earl and Connie Sutton, the defendant's parents. Those payments ran for 84 consecutive months, 7 years. The total was $92,400. James Parker paused. He let the number sit in the room. So the combined financial support provided by Willa Sutton to her family members, documented in verified bank records, totals what amount? $130,800. I watched Brent's face from across the room. His jaw tightened. Shayla's hands, still folded on the table, went white at the knuckles. Their attorney leaned toward them and whispered something. Brent didn't respond. He was staring at the laptop screen as though he could make the numbers rearrange themselves through force of will. They couldn't. Numbers don't rearrange. That's the thing about documentation. It doesn't care what story you've told yourself. Then James Parker called Margaret Collins. Margaret was 44, composed, precise. She specialized in digital forensics, authentication of electronic communications, metadata analysis, recovery of original file structures. James Parker's firm had retained her after Douglas flagged the text message screenshots as the opposing side's primary evidence. James Parker asked her to describe her findings. Margaret pulled up the metadata report on screen. She explained, in clear, specific language, that the text message screenshots submitted as evidence were not authentic. The files had been created using a consumer message editing application. a program freely available online that allows users to construct fabricated text message threads with customized phone numbers, timestamps, and message content. The room shifted. I could feel it. Not a sound. A weight. Like the air pressure had changed. Margaret continued. The embedded metadata in the screenshot files showed creation timestamps of March 2024. The conversations they depicted were allegedly from January 2023, 14 months earlier. The file properties confirmed the images were generated, not captured. They were not screenshots of real messages, they were manufactured documents. James Parker asked, "In your professional opinion, Ms. Collins, were these text messages authentic communications between Willa Sutton and Brent Sutton?" "No, they were fabricated." Judge Howard looked at Brent and Shayla's attorney. He asked in an even tone if counsel would like additional time to respond to the forensic evidence. There was a long silence, the kind of silence that fills a room the way water fills a jar, completely, with no space left. Their attorney said no. Shayla sat absolutely still. She did not look at Brent. She looked at the table. Her hands hadn't moved. Her face hadn't changed. But something behind her eyes had gone out, like a light switched off in a window you've been watching from across the street. Brent's composure broke differently. His shoulders dropped. His jaw unclenched. He looked for the first time in the hearing, like a man who had just realized the floor beneath him was not solid. It had never been solid. He'd simply never looked down. James Parker then asked me to take the stand. He asked me about the founding of Sutton Grounds. He asked when I started the company, how I capitalized it, what the early years looked like. I answered simply, self-funded, 1 truck, 1 trailer, a business license I filed myself. He asked me why I built it. I said, I built it so my daughter would never have to depend on anyone the way I had depended on family. Judge Howard paused. He asked me to describe the business further. The office, the operations. I pulled up a photo on my phone to show the workspace. And in the background of the photo, on the wall behind my desk, was a framed drawing, a garden layout, detailed and careful, drawn in colored pencil by a child's hand. Judge Howard looked at it. He asked when my daughter drew it. I said, "She was 7. He nodded once. He looked at the drawing for another moment. Then he set my phone down and turned to address the courtroom. The ruling was direct. The lawsuit was dismissed. The claim of a $175,000 verbal loan was unsupported by any banking record, wire confirmation, certified check, or written agreement. The forensic evidence confirmed the text message screenshots were fabricated. Judge Howard ordered Brent Sutton to pay $43,200 in sanctions and attorney's fees for filing a frivolous and fraudulent claim. He referred Shayla Sutton's conduct, specifically the fabrication of evidence, for criminal review under South Carolina evidence tampering statutes. He voided Earl Sutton's fraudulent lien against Sutton Grounds business accounts with a formal court reprimand attached to the public record. And he flagged Connie Sutton's call to Harper's school for investigation by the Greenville County School District as potential harassment. 4 actions, 1 ruling, every single thing they had built to destroy me, dismantled in the time it takes to read a page. Brent didn't move when the sanctions were announced, $43,200. He sat in his chair and stared at the table the same way Shayla had been staring at it for the past 20 minutes. Their attorney gathered his papers without speaking. Shayla stood up slowly, mechanically, like someone leaving a building after a fire alarm. Present in body, absent in everything else. I stood. I picked up my folder. I thanked James Parker. I walked past the plaintiff's table without looking at it. In the hallway outside the courtroom, my phone was already buzzing. I glanced at the screen. 3 missed calls from my mother's number. 2 from a number I didn't recognize. A text from Brent's phone, just 3 words. Call me back. I pressed decline on each notification. I turned off the ringer. I slid the phone into my bag. I walked out of the courthouse into the overcast morning. The parking lot was quiet. I got into my car, set the folder on the passenger seat, and started the engine. It turned over with a low, steady hum. I drove to Harper's school. I sat in the pickup line with the other parents. When Harper climbed into the back seat, she looked at me and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "How was your day?" I said, "It's done." She nodded. She opened her sketchbook. I pulled out of the lot and drove home. That evening, after Harper was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. The house was dark except for the screen and the streetlight coming through the blinds. My phone was still off. I didn't turn it back on. I opened my contacts and began going through them, one at a time. I blocked Brent's number. I blocked Shayla's number. I blocked my mother's number. I blocked my father's number. I removed myself from the family group chat. I deleted the thread of unread messages without opening them. I removed Earl and Connie from Harper's emergency contact list at the school. I'd do the paperwork in the morning, but I made the note now on a sticky pad beside my laptop in my own handwriting. I changed the gate code on the driveway. I canceled the automatic insurance premium payment, $1,100 a month, the one I'd never missed in 7 years. I watched the confirmation screen appear. The status changed from active to canceled. I didn't do it in anger. I did it in clarity. The door closed softly. No slam. Just the quiet click of the lock sliding into place. The weeks following the ruling were quiet in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Not empty quiet. Not the kind of quiet that waits for something to break it. Real quiet. The kind that comes when the thing you've been bracing against finally stops pressing. I went to work. I picked Harper up from school. I cooked dinner. I updated project timelines for Sutton Grounds and met with a new residential client in Traveler's Rest who wanted a native plant garden along her back fence line. I slept through the night for the first time in months. I woke up without checking my phone for messages I didn't want to read, because those messages couldn't reach me anymore. Harper noticed. She didn't say anything about it directly. She was 11 and careful in the way 11-year-olds are careful when they understand more than they let on. But she laughed more. She left her sketchbook open on the kitchen counter instead of keeping it closed in her backpack. She asked if she could have a friend over on Saturday, and when I said yes, she smiled without looking away, without qualifying it, without checking my face first for signs of stress. That was enough. That was everything. The information about my family came in pieces over the following months. I didn't seek it out. I didn't ask. Greenville is not a large city, and when a civil court filing becomes public record, which it does automatically, people in the community read it. They don't announce that they've read it. They just know. The first thing I heard, through a vendor I'd worked with for 6 years, was about the sanctions, $43,200 due within 30 days. Brent didn't have it. He'd never had it. His income from the leasing agency was inconsistent on the best months, and the months following the ruling were not the best months. His employer had learned about the lawsuit, not from me, from the public filing, and Brent's position, already precarious, became untenable. He wasn't terminated immediately. He was moved off his active client accounts and reassigned to administrative tasks. Within 3 months, he resigned. Whether he was asked to resign or chose to resign, I don't know. The result was the same. The car lease, the one I'd been paying $800 a month for 4 years, was now entirely his responsibility. The first payment he missed was the month after the ruling. By the third missed payment, the leasing company began recovery proceedings. Within 4 months of the hearing, the car was gone. His second repossession. Shayla's situation was worse. The criminal referral for evidence fabrication moved forward through the Greenville County Solicitor's Office. Within 4 months of the ruling, she was formally charged under South Carolina's evidence tampering statutes. I didn't follow the details. I didn't need to. What I knew, through the same channels that carry every piece of small city information, whether you want it or not, was that the charge was a felony, that Shayla retained an attorney she and Brent could not afford, that the legal fees from both the civil sanctions and the criminal defense were climbing past anything their household could absorb. They listed the house within 5 months of the ruling. It sold for less than they owed. The mortgage had been stretched during the years when Brent's income was supplemented by my payments, and Shayla's spending assumed those payments would never stop. When they stopped, the math collapsed. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Greenville. The kind of apartment with shared laundry in the basement in a parking lot where the lines have faded to suggestions. Brent, without the car, without the leasing position, without the network that came with it, took a job driving for a rideshare service using Shayla's vehicle. He was 35 years old, working hours that started after dark and ended before dawn, picking up strangers for a fraction of what he used to earn walking clients through commercial properties. The $43,200 in sanctions remained outstanding. A payment plan had been arranged through the court. The monthly amount was $1,200, more than he'd been paying on the car lease I used to cover for him. I did not feel satisfaction when I heard these things. I did not feel triumph. I felt the same thing I'd felt the night I sat at the kitchen table and canceled the insurance payment. Clarity. These were consequences. They were not mine to carry, and they were not mine to celebrate. They simply were. Earl's unraveling was slower and in some ways heavier. The fraudulent lien he'd filed against Sutton Grounds was voided by Judge Howard with a formal court reprimand attached to the public record. That reprimand, a legal notation that Earl Sutton had filed a fraudulent lien without legal basis or counsel, became part of the same public filing that contained the rest of the ruling. And approximately 6 weeks after the hearing, that filing surfaced in the Greenville Community Newsletter. Standard public record coverage, a paragraph and a column most people skim on Sunday mornings with their coffee. But Earl had spent 12 years on the Greenville HOA board, 12 years of attending meetings, reviewing neighborhood covenants, adjudicating fence disputes and parking complaints with the quiet authority of a man who believed his judgment was sound because no one had ever told him otherwise. The community newsletter changed that. Within days of publication, Earl was asked, quietly, by phone, not in a public meeting, to resign from the board. He did. He had no choice. A man with a court reprimand for filing a fraudulent lien cannot sit on a board that governs community standards. The contradiction is too visible. Earl stepped down after 12 years, and the thing he had used to define himself in retirement, the board seat, the title, the sense of jurisdiction, was gone. My mother, Connie's call to Harper's school was forwarded to the Greenville County School District for formal investigation as potential harassment. I don't know the outcome of that investigation. I didn't follow up. I didn't need to. What mattered was that the call, the one that pulled my daughter out of class and sat her in a guidance counselor's office for 40 minutes without explanation, was documented, flagged, and assigned a file number. It existed in a system now. It would not be forgotten, even if Connie wished it could be. I heard through a mutual acquaintance whose name I will not mention that Earl and Connie's Sunday dinners had stopped. The table where Connie used to refill glasses and Earl used to sit at the head and Brent used to talk about deals he was closing. That table was quiet now? Not the sharp quiet I had learned to carry. A different kind. The kind that comes when the people who sat around it can no longer look at each other without seeing the cost of what they did together. I didn't reach out. They didn't reach out. The numbers I'd blocked stayed blocked. The group chat I'd removed myself from continued without me. Or didn't. I would never know. That was the point. 1 month after the ruling, Sutton Grounds won the Greenville Municipal Parks contract. $280,000, the largest single project in the company's 10-year history. James Parker called to tell me. He'd seen the announcement in the city procurement bulletin. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat in my office chair and looked at the wall across from my desk where Harper's garden sketch hung in its frame, colored pencil on white paper. A detailed garden layout drawn by a 7-year-old who saw something in the dirt that most adults walk past without noticing. I left it exactly where it was. The morning the contract was signed, I picked Harper up from school early. She climbed into the truck and looked at me with the expression she always wore when something was different. Not suspicious, just alert. I told her we were going to the garden supply store. She asked why. I said because she was picking every single plant. We spent an hour in that store. Harper walked up and down the rows with a cart, selecting purple coneflower and black-eyed Susan and creeping thyme and a rosemary bush she said smelled like Thanksgiving. I followed behind her and didn't correct a single choice. She chose with the same careful eye she'd had at 7, the same instinct for what belongs next to what, the same quiet certainty that some things grow better together than apart. We drove home and spent the afternoon in the backyard. I dug. She planted. The soil was warm and dark, and the sun moved across the yard in long, slow angles while we worked without saying much. When we finished, we stood at the edge of the new bed and looked at what we'd built. It was small. It was real. It was ours. That evening, Harper stood at the kitchen sink washing dirt off her hands. I stood beside her, drying a trowel with a dish towel. The kitchen was quiet, the good quiet, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Harper turned off the faucet and looked at me. She said, "I'm glad it's over." I said, "Me too." She dried her hands on the towel I was holding. She paused. Then she said, "You built something real? They couldn't take it." I held the towel. I didn't respond. There was nothing to add. Harper went to her room to draw. I stood at my office window and looked at the project calendar pinned to the wall beside the garden sketch. The municipal parks contract was written across 3 months in blue ink. Below it, 4 other projects, each one a handshake I'd earned, 10 years of building, 1 daughter who understood what it meant. I built it so she'd never have to depend on someone who could take it away. I built it right. Some doors close so better ones can open. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's protection. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Loyalty earns its place. And the only legacy worth giving your child is the proof that you can build something true, protect it without apology, and walk forward without looking back. I never regretted a single second of it. If you enjoyed this story about protecting your daughter, building something real, and letting the truth do its work in silence, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.